Hello and welcome to Art Song Notes. My name is Cara Alfano. Today we're going to be taking a look at Gabriel Fauré's melancholy chanson, Ici-bas, with poetry by Sully Prudhomme. I'll take you through the pronunciation of the French text and then give you an English translation of that text. We'll talk about the meaning of the text and study how the text and the music work so well together to create this beautiful song. And then lastly, I'll leave you with some vocal technique tips that could help aid you in your practicing of Ici-bas. So let's get started with the pronunciation of the French text. Ici-bas, tous les lilas meurent, tous les chants des oiseaux sont courts. Je rêve aux étés qui demeurent toujours. Ici-bas, les lèvres effleurent, sans rien laisser de leur velours. Je rêve aux baisers qui demeurent toujours. Ici-bas, tous les hommes pleurent, leurs amitiés ou leurs amours. Je rêve aux couples qui demeurent toujours. Okay, now let's go through an English translation of that text as provided by Sergius Kagen in this particular collection of Fauré 30 songs published by the International Music Company. And the English translation is as follows. Down here, all lilacs die. All songs of the birds are short. I dream of summers that endure forever. Down here, lips fade and leave nothing of their velvet. I dream of kisses that last forever. Down here, all men weep for their friendships or their loves. I dream of couples who remain always together. So now let's talk a little bit about what this text means. Well, I think it is a beautiful contrast between the realities of this world, where life changes, where we will experience times of grief and suffering through the loss of relationships, through the loss of loved ones, through the loss of things of beauty, or the loss of experiences. Now, this is contrasted with the hope of there being something better. This is contrasted with the hope that there will be a place and a world where summer endures, where kisses last forever and couples remain together forever. And we see in the poetry this vacillation between the realities of this world, but the hope for the next one. So now let's take a look at the compositional style and structure of Ici-bas. So we're going to take a look at the compositional style and structure of Ici-bas by first taking a look at the structure of the poetry itself. Now you'll notice that the first stanza of Ici-bas is comprised of the first 3 lines of the poetry. And then the second stanza is comprised of the second set of 3 lines of Ici-bas. Now the first 2 lines in each one of the stanzas, which is Ici-bas, tous les lilas meurent, tous les chants des oiseaux sont courts. And in the second stanza, Ici-bas, les lèvres effleurent sans rien laisser de leur velours. Those all focus on this mortal world and the suffering and sorrow that we experience here. Now, the third line in both the first stanza and the third line in the second stanza focus on the hope of a better place to come, where summer endures forever and where kisses last forever. Now, I want you to note that the music of the first stanza and the second stanza are the same. Once we get to the third stanza, the music changes and we no longer use 3 lines of poetry, but now there are 4 lines of poetry. The first 2 lines in this third stanza focus again on the mortal world, our earthly existence here, where we experience grief and sorrow from the loss of friendships and loved ones. But then the second set of 2 lines that end out this poem and that will end out this song focus on, again, the hope of a place where love and joy and couples will remain together forever. Now, I think something that's very interesting about this third stanza. The third stanza begins briefly in a major key. Stanzas 1 and 2 began in a minor key. And we'd already talked about how the stanzas 1 and 2 vacillate between a minor key and major key, going back and forth and back and forth. This happens in stanza 3 too, except again, we're starting in a major key, which I think is a little interesting. The other thing I want to point out that I think is interesting is the use of the word demeure. We see this in all 3 of the stanzas, and this is the word for remain or stay. However, look at how the word demeure is treated musically in the third stanza. It is treated in a very climactic way by being placed on the highest note of the whole song, and then we have a rather large intervallic downward leap on demeure. So I just want you to note that because I think that is an interesting thing to think about why Fauré decided to set the word that means remain and stay on notes that are changing. Okay, now let's go ahead and let me give you some vocal technique tips that might aid you in your practicing of Ici-bas. Technique tip number 1 has to do with how you are feeling your pulse. So let me first start off with us taking a look at the tempo marking of Ici-bas. Note that it is adagio, meaning slow. So when you are first learning this piece, I would highly recommend that you feel an 8th note pulse rather than a quarter note pulse. This will help you keep track of all the many 16th notes that are in this piece. Now, just a little side note. Sometimes when I give a new student this piece, they see all the 16th notes and they get really nervous because in their minds they think 16th notes mean fast, and that can feel overwhelming. But just remember that the speed, the tempo of this piece is adagio. It is slow. So the 16th notes will not move nearly as quickly as you think that they might. All right, technique tip number 2 has to do with the vocal style of this piece. So this piece could be considered to be sung in a parlando style, meaning a speech-like style, because there are so many 16th notes that it has a speech-like rhythm to the vocal line. So I point this out because I want to draw your attention to any of the notes that are not 16th notes, but are rather longer notes, such as 8th notes or dotted 8th notes or quarter notes. Make sure that you sing all the way through those long notes, keeping a good breath support to support your vocal tone. Let me sing for you an example so you know what I'm talking about. Starting at the very beginning. Ici-bas, tous les lilas meurent, tous les chants des oiseaux s'encourent. Note that you could hear me sing all the way through meurent and oiseau. So just make special note of that. All right, technique tip number 3 has to do with learning how to sing legato line, which is oh so very important in French chanson. Now, if you've watched any of my other art song note videos, you will see me having talked about lip trills, tongue trills, buzzy Z's, buzzy V's, using any of those tools to help teach your body how to create a consistent airflow that will help you support your vocal tone. So what I would recommend is doing section by section using lip trills, tongue trills, buzzy Z's or buzzy V's, such as this. Or or now, the only thing I would say is be aware if any of those particular exercises cause you to create more tension in the jaw or the tongue, because we really want to avoid adding any extra tension to the body. All right, technique tip number 4 has to do with the relative nature of dynamic markings. So when you see a piano dynamic marking in the music, I encourage you not to think so much about having to sing it softly, because psychologically, sometimes when we think about having to sing something softly, we sing it with a lack of energy and with a lack of tonal quality or tone core to the tone. That's what I'm trying to say. And so rather than think of singing those passages softly, think of other words to describe the emotions that you feel as you are singing this text. Are you singing it in a melancholy way, or in a sorrowful way, a grieving way, or maybe a hopeful way? My point is, find more specific emotional words that you can assign to the phrases that you're singing, and that will help give you more motivation to shape the phrase and to keep a really beautiful chord to your tone. Now, my 5th and final vocal technique tip has to do with practicing the French language apart from the actual music itself. Now, as you remember, towards the beginning of this video, I went through the pronunciation of the French text. And you may have noticed I did it in a very exaggerated, elongated fashion, which you may have thought sounded a little odd. But I will tell you, by practicing it that way, you are practicing how to speak in a legato fashion, which will then translate into singing the song in a legato fashion. And it will also help you be more precise with the pronunciation of the French, because French itself is a very, very legato language. So I highly recommend practicing the pronunciation of the French text apart from the music. Well, thank you so much for joining me here on Art Song Notes today. If you found this video to be helpful in your study of Ici-bas, then I invite you to check out some of the other videos here on this channel. And of course, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel. Until next time, happy singing.